Today's video is sponsored by CrowdSec. CrowdSec is an open source and collaborative intrusion protection system that brings a whole new meaning to the phrase, knowledge is power. This solution protects your servers by blocking unwanted behaviors including but not limited to port scans, cross-site scripting, brute forcing, and more. And it does this in a very exciting way by making security a community effort rather than a personal one. You've no doubt seen the impact that collaborative processes have had on businesses and end users, but have you ever seen a collaborative security solution? Well, neither have I, until now. And that's what CrowdSec is. It's an intrusion prevention solution that takes real security events into account and leverages that information to enhance the protection of your servers. Whenever CrowdSec prevents an intrusion attempt on your server, it actually allows all the other servers out there in the wild to benefit from that as well, because anytime a server with CrowdSec installed sees an intrusion attempt, it helps other servers also prevent attacks from that same IP. And one of the best things about CrowdSec is that they follow a scientific, community-based approach to help make the industry better and safer for everyone. By just installing a few packages, you can start protecting your servers immediately. And the best part about this is that CrowdSec is free. And by free, I mean actually free. Not free for a certain number of servers. There's no trial period. You can literally install it right now without so much as signing up anywhere. To get started, all you have to do is simply add the repository to your server, install the required packages, start and enable the service, and you're literally done. That's it. For further information and documentation, check out the URL that you see on your screen right now. And in addition to that, you could also check out the installation video that I did on this very channel that goes over the entire process. Thank you so much to CrowdSec for sponsoring today's video. I really appreciate it. Now, let's go ahead and get started. Hello again, everyone. In the previous class, we went over backups and snapshots, and that's really important. But security is also really important, and thankfully, Proxmox actually includes an integrated firewall feature by default. You don't have to use it, especially if you have another firewall that you prefer that's ahead of Proxmox, but it doesn't hurt to have a firewall feature within Proxmox itself, and it's worth checking out. Setting up a firewall is very important, so if you don't already have a solution, then the Proxmox firewall is pretty effective. And configuring firewall rules is almost like an art form, especially when it comes to administrators that, are into that kind of thing. But even if it's not your cup of tea, it's still a very important thing, and we're going to explore it in this video. We're going to take a look at the integrated firewall feature of Proxmox in more detail. So let's do that. All right, so let's start exploring firewalls. Now, the first thing that's probably the most confusing to newcomers is that there's firewall settings, well, all over the place. Right now, I have the host highlighted, PVE1, and you can see that we have a firewall section here. If I click on a container, we have a firewall section. If I click on a VM, you guessed it, we have a firewall section. If I click on data center, we also have a firewall section. So if you want to add some firewall rules, where should you put those firewall rules? That's what I'm hoping to break down in this video. I'm going to show you exactly where you need to create those rules. Now, first and foremost, it's easy to think about this as a top-down kind of view. So if you add a firewall rule here to data center, it's going to apply to the data center. If you add your firewall rules here underneath the host, then those firewall rules are going to apply to the host. Same for containers and VMs. So where you create those rules kind of depends on where you want that abstracted. Now the thing is though, none of what I just said will actually matter if firewalls are disabled altogether. So here I am on data center view, and underneath firewall and then options, firewall is set to no. Now you shouldn't actually enable the firewall just yet. Just understand so far that when the firewall is turned off, it doesn't work. But if you turn it on without actually creating firewall rules, then the issue is going to be that you'll lose access to the Proxmox web console, and we don't want that. Now, you don't actually have to follow along with what I'm about to do, but what I am going to do is lock myself out on purpose, which is why I don't want you to follow along. I think seeing this will help you understand how the firewall actually works. So what I'm going to do is edit this. I'm not going to save it just yet. I'm going to drop down to a terminal, and I'm going to start a ping to the Proxmox host itself. And now we can see that the ping is happening. And back up here in the web console, again, don't follow along with what I'm doing. I'm going to enable the firewall. I'll click OK. And then if I go back down to the terminal, nothing is happening. The ping has stopped. And now I have a connection error. I have actually lost access to the web console. I can't click on anything. Nothing is actually going to work. It's just going to load, and I can't actually disable the firewall here. So again, I'm locked out. Now thankfully, on my end, I have an easy solution for that. I can actually just access the IPMI console, which I'll do right now. And then I'll go to Remote Control. And now I have a terminal right here I can use to re-enable my access to the web console. And thankfully, that's actually easy to do. I can run nano, or whatever text editor I want, it doesn't really matter. And the file that I want to edit is /etc, and then /pve, firewall, and then cluster.fw. So this config file right here allows me to enable or disable the firewall for the entire cluster. It's enabled right now, so I'm going to change that to a 0. And this is nano, so we have our options down here as far as saving files and whatnot. I'm just going to save it, Control-O, and then Enter, and then Control-X. And that should be everything that I'll need to do. Now I have access to the web console again. Notice that the connection error is gone. If I go down here, my pings have resumed, so I have restored access to the server. That's pretty cool. So, what you just saw was me locking myself out on purpose. And that just goes to show you that when you enable the firewall in Data Center View, it's going to enable it for better or worse. So we shouldn't actually enable the firewall until we have the rules created that are important for us to retain access to the server. The default policy right here is to drop traffic. This is the input policy, and it's going to drop everything incoming. And that's why I lost access. The default is to drop, and well, it dropped my traffic. So I guess you could say that it works. Now, what I want to do is create some rules here, just to show you some examples. So I'll click on Firewall, and I'll add a rule. So for incoming, I'm going to leave it on Accept, which is what it is. I'm going to enable this particular rule. The interface, I'm going to set it to VMBR0. That's the default bridge that Proxmox uses. If that's different on your end, you might have to type a different interface name here. For the source, I'm going to leave this blank right here. But if I did want to set a particular source, like an IP address, I could do that here. But what I want to do is actually select the protocol. I'll select TCP. And the destination port is 8006. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm trying to create a rule right here, which is going to accept traffic that is going to port 8006. You'll notice that 8006 is in the address bar right here. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a rule that is going to allow access to the web console. I didn't actually type a source or a destination. So right now, I'm allowing everyone access to the console. In the future, I'll probably want to dial that down and not allow everyone in, but I think it's good enough for now. I'm going to add this rule, and now it's here. Now I'm not actually going to lose access or anything because the firewall itself is disabled. As you recall, when I enabled this, I lost access pretty much immediately. But now I have a rule that's going to, hypothetically, or at least I hope, allow me access to the web console. So let's go ahead and enable the firewall right now and see what happens. I'll give it a few seconds. Let's see if I lose access. And to be on the safe side, I'm going to click on something else. Now, so far, it doesn't look like I lost access. I can still click on things. That's a really good sign. If I go back down here to the terminal, well, I did lose access to ping, but you know what? That's actually okay because I do have access to the web console, and I knew this would happen Because the thing is, when I clicked on Firewall right here for the data center, I created this rule right here, which is allowing me, or pretty much everyone, access to port 8006, which is, of course, the web console. But that does not imply access to ping or ICMP traffic. So what I could do is add yet another rule. I'll set it to accept, and for the protocol, I'll set it to ICMP. Now let's have a little bit of fun. I want to allow only my laptop to ping this server. Then /32, and the /32 limits the scope to that one IP address. So far so good. I'll enable the rule and then add it. So we have another rule right here. And actually I should have put the interface here. Let me go ahead and adjust that. I'll click OK, and let's drop down. And as you can see, pings are restored. So let's go ahead and SSH into the server. Let's see if that works. It won't, but we may as well try it. So what I'm going to do is attempt an SSH connection to PVE1, which obviously won't work. It's just going to time out. That's expected. So to allow my laptop access, what I need to do is add yet another rule. So protocol is going to be TCP. Destination port is going to be 22. That is the port for SSH. And actually, I click up here and then scroll down. This is even easier. Instead of manually creating it, what I could do is click on SSH right here. And then for the source, I'll type in yet again the IP address to my laptop. I'll enable the rule and click add. So we have another rule here. I'm going to cancel out of this connection attempt right here and try it again. And would you look at this? It's working. Now, I'm not going to actually connect via SSH. We'll cover that later. But we can see that it's working. It's asking for my password. If it wasn't working, it would just continue to time out. So that does mean that the firewall rule that I created is actually working. Now let's see how this is actually abstracted when I go down another layer. I'm going to actually create some rules here under PVE1. But before I do that, I want to remove this rule right here. And now it's gone. And that should also mean that I won't be able to SSH into that server anymore. And as you can see, I'm no longer able to use SSH to connect to that server. That's expected. So what I'm going to do under PVE1 is create that particular rule. I'm already on the firewall section, so I'm going to add a rule. I'm going to accept. Let's just use the macro of SSH because that's easier to do. So I'll select that. When I can find it, there it is. Let's enable it. And again, I'll type in my IP address right here. And there it is. So the interface VMBR0, yet again, let's add it. And it's added. Let's cancel out of this. Let's try that again. And now it works. So what just happened here? Now, so far we understand that in order for any firewalls to work at all, you have to go here on the data center view to firewall and then options and then enable it. But you shouldn't actually enable it until you've created the rules that you intend on creating. So in the actual firewall section here, I have some rules here that allow me access to the server. So this rule here, ICMP, allows me to ping the server. So this is going to apply data center wide. So if I added yet another host here, this rule is going to allow me to ping that host as well. So this saves me from manually adding this rule right here to every single host. Just makes things a little bit easier. And the same is true for this rule right here. It allows me access to the web console because the web console runs on port 8006. Now, on another level, I did have an SSH option here that's not here now. I created that here under PVE1. And that's why I'm able to SSH into PVE1. If I add another server to the cluster, this rule will not be present because I created this rule underneath this particular host, so it applies to this particular host. It's not going to apply to PVE2 when I go to add that. If I did want it to apply to the entire data center, I should have created that rule up here in data center. But because I didn't, it applies only to this server. And now that I've added it, I am able to SSH into the server. Now, we do have this particular server here. If I go back to the console, what is the IP address? Let's see. I'll log in. And I'll type the right password this time. And now I'm in, so what's the IP address? 249.250. So what I'm going to do is attempt to SSH directly into the virtual machine. And it actually works. As you can see, I was able to SSH directly into the server. So what I'm going to do is actually remove this rule right here. And now it's gone. And sometimes it needs a few seconds to apply. But anyway, I'm going to try to connect to that particular virtual machine one more time here. And it still works. Why does that still work? Let's actually make sure that it still works, because again, it takes some time for firewall rules to apply. I did remove it. It still works. So when you get to this level, if I add a firewall rule to PVE1, it applies to PVE1. But here on the web server, underneath firewall, firewall is disabled. And the reason why I was able to SSH into the web server, despite the fact that I removed the firewall, was because the firewall was disabled on web server 1. So I just enabled that. I'll enable it here as well. And it's enabled. So what that should mean then is I should not be able to SSH into that server if I go to try it again. And as you can see, I'm not able to do that. If I go back up here to PVE1 and re-add that firewall rule that I had here previously, I'll set it to VMBR0. I'll enable it. Now that's enabled. Let's cancel out of here. And let's run a little experiment. Do you think it's going to work? I'll give it a few seconds to make sure that all the firewall changes have been applied. I think enough time has passed now. Let's try it. It's not working. But wait a minute. I've enabled SSH right here, and I'm allowing traffic from the IP address for my laptop. That's odd. Let's try to SSH into the host again. And that was 249.4. And that works. And the IP address, just to make sure that I'm typing in the correct one, here under web server 1, the IP address is 249.250. And that was the IP address that I tried. I'm not able to do that. So I'll break out of here. Let's go back to the web console. And what that's done is taught us yet another lesson about the firewall. So when you get down here to this level, basically any level that's not data center, the firewall rule is going to apply only for that particular object. So when I enabled SSH right here, I'm enabling it only for PVE1. So if I want to allow access to web server 1, what I need to do is do the same thing right here and add that firewall rule to it. So I'll enable the rule, and let's go ahead and choose SSH. I'll select that. And for the source, yet again, I'll type the IP address for my laptop. And now it's added. As you can see here, I have a password prompt. So that means that I am allowed to access SSH to this particular server. Just to make sure, I typed in the password and now I'm definitely in. So, as a quick summary, I want to make sure that you guys understand this. In order for firewalls to work at all, you have to go to the data center view right here. And then underneath firewall and then options, you have to enable the firewall. Again, you shouldn't do that until you have the rules created that you want to have created, elsewise you risk locking yourself out. So to fix that, again, I added these two rules right here. This one here is just a test. You don't have to allow ICMP. But anyway, I have these two rules right here. And the one that matters the most is this one. the Proxmox web console uses port 8006, so I've enabled that right here. After I did that, I then went to Options and then enabled the firewall. It was safe to do so at that point because I've already enabled the web console, so I didn't actually risk locking myself out. So that's pretty cool. Now down here, on the host itself, I have some firewall rules. I can also enable or disable the firewall. It's enabled currently. And now that it's enabled, I created this firewall rule right here that allows me to SSH into this particular host. Now that does not actually apply to the VMs underneath that host. They have their own firewall settings. But if I actually wanted to use a firewall on the container, I would have to enable it. Same for VMs. Right here it's enabled. And then after you enable it, or even before you enable it, you create the rules that you want to have applied to that server right here. So hopefully that helps you understand how the firewall rules are abstracted and how they work. You start at the data center. You enable the ports here that you want to have enabled, especially port 8006. Turn on the firewall, and keep just drilling down here and adding firewall rules as you see fit to increase the security. At the end of the day, it's important to block everything to all servers unless something actually needs to connect to a specific server. So hopefully that helps you understand how the firewall works in Proxmox. All right, so at this point, you guys should be well on your way to creating firewall rules to help secure your Proxmox installation. That's definitely a very important thing to do. Now, in the next class, it's going to get even geekier because we're going to take a look at the command line in Proxmox, which is going to be especially fun for me because I love the command line. So make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and that video might already be uploaded right now, so go ahead and check it out and I'll meet you there.